Welcome to your Daily 5 for Wednesday, January 31st, 2024. I will warn everybody up front, this 5 is about the Uvalde shooting in the United States that happened just over, or maybe it's just under 2 years ago. I think it said 18 or 20 months ago. So if you don't want to hear anything about that, just go ahead and skip today's 5. And I'm not going to be doing any type of thorough analysis of the shooting in general and the breakdowns and everything else because there's no way I could do that in 5 minutes. Instead, I want to focus on one thing, and this got brought up again recently because there was a report released, a 500-plus page report from the Department of Justice about the incident, the shooting that left, I believe, 18 or 19 students and a couple of teachers dead. And, this is one of those things that most people have probably forgotten about because in America, school shooting memory lasts about a month. If you weren't directly impacted by it, you didn't lose anybody by it, so you may have forgotten about it. But this was a rather big deal when it happened because there were multiple failures in the police response. And again, I'm not going to get into all of that because I'm not in a position to, but I have heard one response to people who have been critical of the way that law enforcement responded that I just cannot let go of because it just makes me infinitely angry. And this is when people say something along the lines of, well, you can't understand, it's easy to criticize when you're not a police officer. So who are you to say that these officers acted incorrectly? Now, to an extent, they're right. I'm not a judge. I'm not in the Department of Justice. I have no legal authority to regulate law enforcement. So, to some extent, I'm nobody to say anything. However, what they usually mean by this is, well, if you're not doing the job, you can't understand the difficulty in doing it. And they cite things like the fact that you have to be in harm's way in many cases. You are hated by the communities that you are tasked with protecting, that it is a stressful and underpaying job. And all of those things are true. I will grant that all of those, for most police officers, are likely true. Here's the thing about that response, though, is what it's saying, even though they don't use these words, is easy for you to say it, you're a coward, and you would respond the same way or worse if you were there. To which I also respond, you're right. That's why I'm not a police officer, because I have an awareness of what that job would require in its idealist form, which is that I am putting my life on the line to protect innocent people and the public. Now, again, we can get into the legality of that because they're actually not legally required to do that everywhere, which might shock some Americans, but that's the way it is. But the reality is that criticism or that response or whatever you want to call it, that way of trying to deflect blame doesn't work. It doesn't work because there's a reason that people go into dangerous jobs and other people don't. And if you're not willing to accept the risks of that job, then you don't belong in it. It's that simple. If it seems like maybe being a police officer is too dangerous for you, then I'd like to inform you that you shouldn't be a police officer. If you're not willing to step, and this is the example of this is even more, the double of the angering happens for me because we're talking about children. That these are not adults that are protecting, let's say, other adults that, that they're on equal footing with. This is the failure to save children. And if you're not willing to defend children as a police officer, I'm thinking maybe you shouldn't be a police officer. I don't know why that seems like such a difficult calculus for some of these people to make before they say stupid things like, easy for you to say you're not a police officer. Yes, it is easy for me to say because I can look at it rationally and determine that I shouldn't be a police officer. Now, like I said, that is not the only defense. I'm not saying that's the totality of it. There's way bigger things involved in this entire affair that are going to get explored through court cases and investigations and everything else. But this one particular defense that I hear brought up, and I've heard it brought up by people at different levels inside of law enforcement and just common people who aren't in law enforcement at all. This one thing, I am sorry, but this is not a defense. It is not a rebuttal. It is not a deflection. It is nothing. To simply say that these officers shouldn't be blamed merely because ordinary people can't understand what it's like to be a police officer, if that is the best defense that you have, then you have no defense of the actions that were taken, or in this case, not taken. So I just wanted to take 5 minutes to point that out because I hear it more often than I should, which should be zero, and it really bugs me every time because it's not saying what they're actually trying to say, which is to accuse people of being chicken or cowards or whatever by saying you couldn't do that job instead of focusing on what not doing that job actually means. Because that's what the real criticism is, and you're aiming it in the wrong direction. Later.